Hi, I'm Brian Jackson, editor at IT World Canada, and we're here concluding the CIO Summit. And for our last interview guest today, we have Laura Payne. She's a Director of Information Security Services at the Bank of Montreal. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. You had a great interactive session about security there. We did work groups and everything, but a couple of great points that came up I want to cover here with you. And the first, you had this interesting saying. You said, what's new is old again. And that was a sort of different way to come at thinking about new infrastructure and working with the cloud. So do you want to explain what you meant there?
Sure. So one of the things that a lot of people talk about is the changing attack surface and how we have now moved into areas like the cloud, and Internet of Things is another area where it's new and shiny and supposedly very different. But the reality is, when it comes to applying security, the same frameworks that we grew through and became more mature at in applying in our traditional server and workstation space are equally applicable in cloud and Internet of Things and in those new expanding areas of technology adoption. So the way you go about understanding what you need to protect and the way that you would gain a depth of knowledge in that space and then be able to apply those settings correctly, and remembering not to just leave defaults and to make good choices about your security in those spaces. Those things all still apply. It may not be the exact same types of policies that you would choose in the traditional space, but the way you go about securing that space is really exactly the same.
Okay. So you keep the same principles, but you might have to use some more flexible approaches sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. The point of going into these spaces is either for the agility, for example, in cloud, it's about being able to spin things up very quickly. So you need to make sure that the security settings you're choosing are appropriate to that end objective, and also making sure that that you've considered those business needs when you're making those choices.
Okay, but at the same time, just because we can use what we already know to approach security doesn't mean we have to stop. We can afford to stop looking at the horizon and what's coming next. And we raised during that session the example of phishing as a new attack vector that has really become a widespread problem. So
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that need to stay agile.
Yeah, so that's a great example of where phishing itself isn't necessarily a super new vector, but we're certainly seeing its prominence becoming more important as other avenues for attack are being more secured. So as our users become the target of these more and more sophisticated attacks, the reality is that we can't expect our users to be that be-all, end-all defense, right? So they can defend against very common attacks, things that are easy to spot, but every user at some point, if they are targeted by a particularly strong adversary, they are going to click through. So an example in that space of technology that's up and coming to combat that would be universal two-factor authentication. And so if you are trying to fight that problem, you need to be aware of what's coming into the market that's going to help you with that. And that's just one example of where being aware of what technologies are up and coming can help you solve problems that are not solvable through traditional approaches like user training.
Laura, thank you so much for your insights and for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
For ITWorldCanada.com, I'm Brian Jackson.